It was the kind of silence New York only knew when the wrong man was in charge, and tonight, that man was just getting started. The rain had been falling all evening, tapping out a lazy rhythm against the tin awnings and neon signs of the Lower East Side. It wasn't the gentle kind of rain that washes a city clean. No, this was the kind that soaked in, made the air heavy, made the shadows thicker. You could smell the damp brick, the old whiskey on the sidewalk outside the speakeasies, the perfume of girls leaning in doorways hoping you had money to spend. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone was trying to play a sad tune, but the wind kept stealing it away. I remember sitting in the back booth of Sal's place, a joint so small you could walk past it twice without noticing. The kind of place you only find if someone tells you where to look, and tonight, everyone who mattered knew exactly where I was. I had my hat tilted low, cigarette burning slow between my fingers, the smoke curling up like it had nowhere better to be. Across the table, a glass of rye whiskey sat untouched. Not because I didn't want it, but because you never let your hands get too busy when you might have to reach for something else. The boys had filtered in one by one, quiet, each giving me the same look, not fear exactly, but the kind of respect a man earns when people know he's willing to do what they can't. Meyer was there, cool as ice, counting the seconds between his glances at the door. Frank Costello sat with his back to the wall, cigarette glowing like a lighthouse in the dim room. Outside, a black sedan idled across the street, rain streaking its windshield. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. When you run this city the way I do, you learn to read the air. You know when the street's just wet and when it's wet because somebody's about to bleed into it. Tonight, the air was telling me to stay sharp. We weren't here for the drinks. We were here because word had come down that certain people, old friends of old bosses, had decided the commission wasn't working in their favor anymore. And when a man feels cheated, he does stupid things. Stupid things get people killed. I lit another cigarette, watched the flame dance against the shadows. In my business, fire's a funny thing. It can warm you or it can burn you alive. Most nights, it's both. The door swung open, letting in a draft that made the smoke shift toward the ceiling. A young kid in a damp overcoat stepped in, eyes darting. He was carrying something in his right pocket. I could see the way the fabric tugged. He made his way past the bar without ordering a drink. His shoes squeaked on the tile, and I could feel Meyer stiffen next to me. "Relax," I said without moving my lips. If he was here for that, we wouldn't hear him coming. The kid stopped at our table, pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat, and set it down like it was the bill for a meal we hadn't eaten. I took my time unfolding it. Inside was just a name. No address. No explanation. I didn't need one. Names were never just names in my world. They were invitations. Sometimes they were death sentences. I slid the paper into my jacket and looked up at the kid. He didn't meet my eyes, smart boy. Without a word, he turned and walked back into the rain. The door shut behind him, and the silence fell again, thicker than before. Outside, the sedan's headlights flared, then vanished into the mist. You might think moments like that are loud. They're not. The loud part comes later, when decisions get made and men start disappearing. Right now, it was all quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat and makes you wonder if maybe it's counting down to something. Meyer leaned in, voice low. "That's the third one this week." "Yeah," I said. "And it won't be the last." I finished my whiskey, let the burn settle in my chest. When you've been in this business long enough, you learn not to get rattled. Everything's a move, and every move has an answer. The trick is knowing the answer before the other guy even knows the question. That's how you stay alive in a city that's always looking for a reason to bury you. We left the speakeasy just past midnight. The rain had eased, but the streets still glistened like fresh oil. I pulled my collar up against the cold and walked with my hands in my pockets, Meyer and Frank on either side. A trolley clanged past, its windows glowing, passengers staring out into the night with faces that didn't know our names and never would. That's the thing about power, most people don't even see it until it hits them in the face. And by then, it's too late. As we turned the corner, I glanced back. The street behind us was empty, but I could feel eyes somewhere in the dark. You always can. New York's a city of watchers. Some watch for opportunity. Some watch for mistakes. And some watch because they're paid to. I kept walking. Whatever was coming, I'd be ready. I'd built too much, climbed too high, and buried too many men to let anyone take it away from me now. This city wasn't just where I lived, it was mine. Every brick, every street lamp, every whisper in every backroom. They could call me a criminal, a king, a devil, I didn't care. All I cared about was that they never forgot my name. And believe me, they wouldn't. Before I was Lucky Luciano, I was just Salvatore Lucania, another immigrant kid with dirt under his nails and hunger in his eyes. And hunger's a dangerous thing when you grow up where I did. My first memory of America wasn't the Statue of Liberty or the shining promise they talk about in history books. It was the stink of the Lower East Side in summer, the sweat, the horse manure, the rotting cabbage in the gutters. It was the sound of people speaking a dozen languages, none of them English, all of them shouting to be heard over the noise of a city that didn't care you existed. We lived in a cramped tenement that could have fit in the lobby of the hotels I'd own years later. One room for 6 of us, Ma, Pop, my sisters, and me. The walls were thin enough to hear every fight, every sob, every baby born in the building. Privacy was for rich people. We had the streets. And if the streets didn't like you, you learned fast or you didn't last. School? I went for a while. But I wasn't there to learn about presidents and poetry. I was there to figure out who had your back and who'd stick a knife in it. The teachers wanted me to sit quiet, but I had no patience for quiet. By the time I was 10, I'd already figured out the real education was happening after the bell rang out on the corners, in the alleyways behind the candy store where the older boys played dice. Ma worked herself to the bone in a garment factory, sewing until her fingers bled. Pop took whatever work he could, hauling, fixing, sometimes nothing at all. Honest work kept you alive, but it didn't get you ahead. I wanted more than survival. I wanted to walk down the street and have people step aside. I wanted my name to mean something. Back then, I didn't know how much that would cost me. The first crew I ran with wasn't much, just a bunch of scrappy kids from the block, most of us fresh off the boat. We fought the Irish kids, the Jewish kids, anybody who crossed into our territory. We didn't have knives at first, just fists, bricks, whatever we could grab. But every fight was a lesson. You learned when to swing, when to run, and when to smile like you weren't scared even if you were bleeding. That's how I met Meyer Lansky. He was a skinny Jewish kid with sharp eyes, the kind of eyes that never stopped calculating. One day I saw him standing his ground against some Irish bruisers twice his size. They had the numbers, but Meyer had the brains. He didn't fight fair, he fought smart. I respected that. Later we started talking, and I realized he wasn't just smart in a fight. He could see the angles, see where the money was, where the risks were worth it. We were different, but we spoke the same language when it came to the streets. I picked up my first real hustle selling protection to kids at school. For a nickel a week, I'd make sure nobody touched them. For a dime, I'd make sure their enemies had a rough couple of days. It wasn't much, but it taught me 2 things. People will pay to feel safe, and safety is only worth what the man providing it is willing to do. Those nickels and dimes added up, and I liked the feeling of having money in my pocket when everyone else was counting pennies. By the time I hit my teens, I traded marbles for cigarettes, cigarettes for dice, dice for cards. Gambling was like oxygen in the neighborhood, you didn't survive without it. I started running small games, learning how to spot a cheat, How to keep the house winning without the suckers realizing they never stood a chance. It wasn't about luck, not even back then. It was about control. Control the game, you control the outcome. That lesson would follow me my whole life. My old man used to look at me like he didn't know what I was turning into. Maybe he didn't like it. Maybe he knew better than to say anything. The truth was, I couldn't see myself working a sewing machine or hauling crates until my back gave out. I wanted more, and in our part of New York, more meant taking it from someone else. That wasn't greed. That was survival with ambition. Meyer and I started pooling what we had, running errands for the older guys. They'd send us to deliver packages, collect debts, sometimes keep watch during meetings that weren't meant for outsiders. That's how I learned the real players' names, men like Frankie Yale, Arnold Rothstein. They didn't yell to be heard. They didn't fight unless it was worth it. They had style. Presence. You could feel when they walked into a room. I watched every move, every gesture, filing it away for later. The Lower East Side was a place that could make you or break you. I saw kids vanish overnight, some locked up, some found floating in the river. Every time I told myself, that's not gonna be me. I kept my head down when I needed to, my fists up when I had to, and my eyes open all the time. The city was a chessboard, and even back then I was learning how to play more than one game at once. I still remember the day I got the name Lucky. I was maybe 17. I'd been walking home late when a couple of guys jumped me, rivals from uptown who thought I was easy pickings. They had a knife. I had nothing but my hands and a bad attitude. I took a few cuts, got my jacket torn, but I walked away while they were limping. Word got around that I'd survived what should have been my last night. Somebody said, "That kid's lucky." The name stuck. I didn't correct them. It was better than Salvatore, and besides, people treated you different when they thought fortune was on your side. But luck's just a word. What kept me alive was knowing when to push, when to pull back, and when to make someone else take the fall. That's the real game. That's the game I started playing before I even knew I'd spend my life running it. The hunger that started in that cramped tenement never went away. It grew. Every coin in my pocket, every nod of respect on the street just made me want more. And more was out there, beyond the neighborhood, beyond the gangs we ran with. Bigger games. Bigger risks. Bigger rewards. I could feel them pulling at me, calling me to step off the curb and into the kind of world where you don't just survive, you decide who survives. And that's where the real story begins. School might have been over for me, but my education was just getting started. The Lower East Side had its own university, the streets, and its professors didn't wear suits. They wore scars. You learned by watching, by listening, by keeping your mouth shut until the right time to open it. And when you opened it, you'd better have something worth hearing. The 5 Points was a different animal from the neighborhood I grew up in. Dirtier, louder, meaner. It was where the worst of every gang came to mix: Sicilians, Irish, Jews, Germans, all packed into a few blocks that smelled like sweat and sin. You could get your throat cut over a pair of shoes there, and nobody would bother to move your body. But it was also where the real money moved. Illegal liquor, stolen goods, gambling, girls, it was all for sale if you knew who to ask. I started running errands for Frankie Yale's people. Yale was a Brooklyn man, all smiles and silk ties, until you crossed him. Then he'd put you in the ground like you'd never existed. From him, I learned presentation. You didn't have to scream to be dangerous. A well-cut suit, a calm voice, and the right friends could do more damage than a loaded gun. I didn't have the suit yet, but I was learning the rest. Every job was a lesson. Delivering envelopes, that taught me who was paying who. Standing outside a meeting, that taught me which faces were worth remembering and which ones wouldn't be around long. You start to see patterns: who rises, who falls, and why. I filed it all away. The men who lasted the longest weren't the strongest or the richest. They were the smartest. They knew when to bend, when to disappear, and when to come back swinging. Prohibition turned the whole city into a gold mine. You could make a fortune just moving liquor from one place to another, and the law was so busy chasing small fry they couldn't keep up with the big operators. That's how I met Arnold Rothstein. He wasn't a street guy, he was something else entirely. He dressed like a banker, talked like a lawyer, and gambled like a man who knew every card before it was played. Rothstein taught me more in a few months than I'd learned in years on the street. He showed me that crime wasn't about chaos. It was about order, your own kind of order. If the law wouldn't give you a seat at the table, you built your own table and you decided who got to sit down. I remember one night at a backroom poker game in Midtown. The place was thick with cigar smoke, the table stacked with cash. Rothstein leaned over to me and said, "The trick isn't winning every hand. It's making sure the losers keep playing." That stuck with me. It wasn't about cleaning a guy out in one go, it was about keeping him in your pocket for the long haul. I started running my own games with that in mind, and the money came faster than I could count it. But with money comes attention, and with attention comes trouble. The cops started to notice me. Some were looking to make an arrest, others to make a deal. I learned to read them the same way I read the guys at the table. The honest ones, they were the most dangerous. You couldn't buy them and you couldn't predict them. The crooked ones were easier. You just had to figure out their price. By 18, I wasn't just some street punk anymore. I had people coming to me for work, for loans, for protection. I kept close with Meyer Lansky. He had the brains for numbers. I had the brains for people. Together, we made a good team and we started thinking bigger. We weren't interested in nickel and dime rackets anymore. We wanted in on the big operations, the bootlegging routes, the high-stakes games, the unions. One winter, I was sent to negotiate a truce between two small crews who'd been fighting over a gambling spot. They were ready to start shooting, but I walked in, shook hands with both sides, and told them how it was gonna be. No threats, no shouting, just facts. They could fight and lose half their guys, or they could split the profits and stay alive. They agreed, and I took a cut for making peace. That was the first time I realized I could be more than a soldier. I could be a broker, a man who made things happen without getting his hands too dirty. Of course, you can't avoid dirt forever. There were beatings, collections, nights when the blood on my cuffs wasn't mine. You tell yourself it's part of the business, and maybe it is. But there's a part of you that changes each time. The first time you hurt someone, you remember it. The second time, less. After a while, it's just another day. Still, I kept my eyes forward. The old bosses, the ones who still ran things like they were back in Sicily, they didn't understand what was coming. America was different. You couldn't run an empire here by hiding in the shadows forever. You had to adapt, expand, and make deals with people outside your own circle. Italians, Jews, Irish, it didn't matter where you came from if you could make money and keep the peace. That idea would cause me trouble later, but at the time it felt like the future. One night, Meyer and I stood on a corner watching the cabs roll past, their headlights cutting through the winter fog. He said, "One day, Lucky, we're gonna run this whole damn city." I laughed, but I believed him. We weren't there yet, but the path was laid out. We just had to keep moving, keep learning, keep winning. Looking back, those years were the foundation. The fights, the deals, the lessons from men like Yale and Rothstein, they were all bricks in the road that would take me from a street kid to the man the papers called the most powerful gangster in America. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about legacy or power. I was thinking about the next job, the next game, the next score. Because in my world, you don't get ahead by dreaming about the top. You get ahead by making sure nobody knocks you off the rung you're standing on. And I wasn't about to let anyone knock me down. Some men are born into power. I had to gamble my way there. And Arnold Rothstein, he was the man holding the deck. I'd seen plenty of sharp operators by then, But Rothstein wasn't just sharp, he was polished. He didn't need to yell, didn't need to throw a punch. When Rothstein walked into a room, it was like the air itself stepped back to give him space. The guy looked like he'd been born wearing a three-piece suit, and I never once saw him with a hair out of place. But don't let the manners fool you. Underneath all that silk and shine, Rothstein was as dangerous as they came. We met at a poker game uptown, one of those quiet backroom affairs where the players talked in whispers and the stakes could buy you a house. Meyer brought me along, said it was time I saw how the big boys played. I remember sitting there, cards in my hand, watching Rothstein more than I watched the game. His face never moved, not even when the pot was big enough to make lesser men sweat through their collars. He didn't play the cards, he played the people. Every bet was a conversation, every raise a message. By the end of the night, he'd taken more than just the table's money. He'd taken their confidence. And the crazy thing was, they'd come back next week for more. After that night, I made it my business to be around him. Some guys tried to earn his trust by talking too much, bragging about what they'd done. I kept my mouth shut unless I had something worth saying. That's how Rothstein liked it, quiet men who listened and learned. He started inviting me to meetings, dinners, games where the real deals got made. Bootlegging routes, union contracts, fixing ball games, it was like seeing the blueprint for the city's underworld. Rothstein didn't just have connections, he had the blueprint for connections. He taught me how to handle politicians, how to talk to cops without ever making it sound like a bribe, how to make a man think something was his idea when it was really mine. He said, "Lucky, the difference between a gangster and a businessman is paperwork. Learn the paperwork and you can be both." I never forgot that. It wasn't all lessons in charm, though. Rothstein was a gambler at heart and not just at the tables. He'd bankroll risky jobs, the kind where you either made a fortune or ended up in a ditch. He knew the odds, but he also knew that fortune favored the man willing to risk more than the other guy. Watching him operate, I started to see crime less like a street fight and more like a chess match. Every move had a purpose, even the ones that looked like mistakes. One summer, he brought me into a deal moving Canadian liquor down through the Great Lakes. The profit margins were insane, but so were the risks. Federal agents, hijackers, rival crews, every mile of that route could have been our last. But Rothstein had it mapped out so clean you'd think we were running milk, not whiskey. We made a killing, and more importantly, I made my bones in the kind of operation that got me noticed by every serious player in the city. Rothstein had a way of making you feel like you were the only man in the room, even if there were 20 others at the table. But I wasn't stupid. I knew I was just one piece on his board. Still, being one of his pieces was better than being the king of some street corner crew. I was seeing the bigger picture now, and I liked what I saw. Then came the night everything changed. It was November of 28, cold enough to make your teeth ache. I was at a club in Midtown when word came that Rothstein had been shot. A card game gone wrong, they said. Some punk claimed Rothstein owed him a debt, and instead of settling it, Rothstein ended up bleeding out in a hotel room. I didn't believe it, not the way they told it. Rothstein was too smart to get caught in a simple beef over cards. Whatever happened, it was bigger than that. I went to see him in the hospital. Even there, pale and weak, he looked like he was in control. He wouldn't say a word about who did it. That was the code. You handled your own business. I stood by his bed, and he just looked at me, gave me the slightest nod. I don't know if it meant goodbye or if it meant, now it's your turn. Maybe both. When he died, it was like someone had yanked the rug out from under the whole city. Every deal he was part of started to wobble. Crews scrambled to grab territory, politicians started making new friends, and the streets felt more dangerous than they had in years. But me, I saw an opening. Rothstein had taught me too well to let that kind of chaos go to waste. I started reaching out to his contacts, not aggressively, just enough to let them know I could keep things steady. Meyer was with me, and so was Frank Costello. Between the three of us, we began to pull together the pieces Rothstein had left behind. We didn't have his reach yet, but we had his playbook. And we weren't afraid to use it. That was the real inheritance Rothstein left me, not money, not territory, but the understanding that this game wasn't about muscle. It was about control. Control the money, the information, the relationships, and you controlled everything else. That idea would be my compass for the rest of my life. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that Rothstein's death was no random act. The city had been changing, and not everyone liked the new way of doing things. The old Sicilian bosses, the ones who still thought they could run New York like a Sicilian village, didn't trust men like Rothstein. And they didn't trust men like me. I knew sooner or later we'd clash. But for the moment, I kept my head down and my hands busy. Power's a fragile thing, you grab it too fast, it slips right through your fingers. You take it slow, and before anyone realizes, it's already yours. So I played the game the way Rothstein had taught me. I smiled when I needed to, shook the right hands, and kept my enemies thinking I was just another ambitious kid trying to make his mark. Inside, I was already planning moves 5 steps ahead. The city was shifting, and if I played it right, I'd be the one everyone came to when they needed something done. And in this business, being the man people come to, that's how you win. Some wars you see coming a mile away. Others sneak up on you like a shadow. The Castellammare's war was a little bit of both. We all felt it building, whispers in backrooms, deals falling apart, old friendships turning cold. But nobody wanted to admit it out loud. Not yet. The old Sicilian bosses, the ones who'd built their empires brick by brick since the days they first set foot in New York, were losing their grip. And men like me? We were the future they didn't want to see coming. It started with Salvatore Maranzano, a man who carried himself like a Roman emperor, all talk about honor and tradition. He came from Castellammare del Golfo, a little fishing town in Sicily, but he thought like Caesar himself. Then there was Joe Masuria, Joe the Boss, the king of the old guard in New York. Masuria was the kind of man who wore his power like a gold watch, heavy, shiny, and impossible to miss. He liked things done his way, crude, loud, and backed by muscle. If you were Sicilian and you wanted to make a living, you either kissed his ring or prepared to be buried wearing your Sunday best. At first, I kept my cards close to my chest. Masuria had me on his payroll, but I'd already learned from Rothstein that loyalty in this business is just another kind of currency. You spend it when you have to. I watched as the streets split in two, the Masuria men and the Maranzano men. Each side started hitting the other, little jobs at first, a truck hijacked here, a numbers spot torched there. But it didn't take long before the bodies started piling up. Frank Costello and Meyer Lansky were my closest allies, and they felt the same way I did. This war wasn't about honor or tradition. It was bad for business. Every bullet in the street meant money lost, cops sniffing around, heat we didn't need. But try telling that to the old bosses. To them, war was just the price of keeping power. One night, Masuria calls me in. We're in a back room in Coney Island, the smell of frying clams mixing with cigar smoke. He's sitting there in his white shirt, suspenders digging into his belly, chewing on a cigar like it's a piece of gristle. Charlie, he says, he was one of the few who still called me by my birth name. These Castellammare's dogs are making a move. I need you to show them who runs this city. I nod, but inside I'm thinking, this guy doesn't realize he's already lost. You can't win a war by clinging to the past. The killings got uglier. Drive-by shootings in the middle of the day. Men ambushed in their own homes. Every funeral was a message, every coffin a warning. And the thing about warnings? The more you hear them, the less you listen. The city was tense, like a violin string pulled too tight. One wrong move and it would snap. I started meeting with Maranzano's people in secret. Not to betray Masuria outright, not yet, but to lay the groundwork. I knew sooner or later one side was going to win, and I wanted to make sure it was the side that could work with me. Maranzano was no fool. He saw the value in someone who could bridge the old world and the new. But he also carried that Sicilian pride, the kind that could make a man blind to reason. By the summer of 30, the war had become a full-blown chess match, and I was the piece both kings thought they controlled. The truth was, I was playing my own game. Masuria had power but no vision. Maranzano had vision but no understanding of the bigger picture. And me? I had both, or at least I thought I did. One night, Meyer and I sat in a dimly lit cafe, going over the situation. "Lucky," he says, "you keep working for Joe the boss, you're gonna end up in a pine box. The guy's a dinosaur. The future ain't Sicilian, it's American. Italians, Jews, Irish, we all work together. Everybody eats." I knew he was right. The old rules were chains, and I was done being shackled. The decision didn't come easy. Betrayal never does, even in our world. But Masuria was dragging me down, and if I didn't cut him loose, I'd sink with him. So I made the call. I told Maranzano I was ready to switch sides on one condition. When the dust settled, there'd be no more of this pure Sicilian nonsense. We'd run things like a business, not a village council. We set it up for April 15, 1931. The meeting with Masuria was to be at a little place in Coney Island, a card game, just like any other day. I brought along a few of my guys, Vito Genovese, Albert Anastasia, and Joe Adonis. We laughed, played cards, drank wine. At one point, I excused myself to the restroom. That was the signal. In less than a minute, the shots rang out. When I came back, Joe the boss was slumped over the table, cards still in his hand. Just like that, the old guard lost its king. The papers had a field day. "Gangland boss slain." They screamed, like it was the first time a mobster had been shot over a game of cards. But for those of us in the life, it wasn't about headlines. It was about what came next. And what came next was Maranzano. For a brief moment, it seemed like peace might be possible. Maranzano took over as the undisputed boss of bosses. He even brought me in as his right-hand man. But I could see it in his eyes, he didn't trust me. Maybe it was because I wasn't from his part of Sicily. Maybe it was because I'd already proven I was willing to take out a boss. Either way, I knew the war wasn't truly over. It had just changed shape. The Castellammare's war taught me two things. First, that loyalty in this business is nothing without vision. And second, that the quickest way to end a war is to make sure you're the one writing the peace terms. By the end of it, I'd positioned myself closer to the top than ever before. But getting there meant I'd made enemies, the kind that smile at you while sharpening the knife. And in this life, the knife always finds its way out. They say power changes a man. I say power only shows you who he really was all along. When Maranzano took over after Masuria's fall, he strutted into that throne like it had been carved for him by God himself. Boss of bosses, he called himself. The newspapers loved it, splashing his name in ink like he was some kind of folk hero. But to the men in the life, it was a dangerous thing, one man holding all the cards, dictating who lived, who died, and how every dollar was counted. It was the old Sicilian way, and for a minute, I played along. At first, Maranzano treated me like a prince. He'd invite me to his office, a little fortress in Midtown Manhattan, and talk to me about the ancient Roman Empire. He had this thing about Julius Caesar, about how the strongest leaders kept their enemies close but never equal. He'd stand there with his hands behind his back, pacing like a general before a battle, telling me how we'd reshape the underworld. The problem was, every story about Caesar ends the same way, with knives in his back. And I could feel Maranzano weighing how sharp his were. He reorganized the families, set up 5 of them in New York, each with its own territory. On paper, it made sense: less fighting, more order. But the way he did it? He put himself at the top of the pyramid like a king, and everyone else was supposed to bow. Me, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, we bowed, sure. But inside, we were already thinking about how to knock the crown off his head. It didn't take long for the shine to wear off. Maranzano started surrounding himself with old world loyalists, guys straight off the boat from Sicily, men who'd never break the traditions. He didn't trust the younger crowd, the ones who worked with the Jews and Irish, who saw the business as something bigger than Sicilian bloodlines. Every time I brought Meyer or Bugsy Siegel around, Maranzano's smile got thinner, like he was smelling something rotten. Then came the whispers. Maranzano had started hiring men with military training, sharpshooters. The kind of guys you don't bring in unless you're planning to take someone out from a distance. Vito came to me one night, his face pale. "Lucky, he's gonna make a move. On you. On me. He thinks we're too close to Lansky, too close to Costello. He thinks we're dangerous." I didn't argue. I'd been feeling it for weeks, that cold, prickling sense that someone's already decided your fate. I knew if I waited, I'd end up another name in the papers. So I flipped the script. If Maranzano was Caesar, then it was time for me to be Brutus. But I wasn't going to stab him in the back in some back alley. No, I wanted something cleaner, something that would send a message to every boss in America: the old way was over. The problem was, Maranzano was careful. Too careful. He didn't go anywhere without his bodyguards, and his office was like a fortress. That's when I had an idea. What if the killers didn't look like killers? What if they looked like cops? In this city, nobody argues with a badge. I called in some of my most trusted men, Bugsy Siegel, Albert Anastasia, and a couple others who knew how to handle themselves. We got them suits, fake badges, even little notebooks to make them look official. The plan was simple: they'd walk right into Maranzano's office under the pretense of a raid, then handle the job before anyone could blink. September 10, 1931. That's the day history shifted. I didn't go myself, no point in putting my face on the scene. I waited in a safe spot, nursing a drink, while my guys carried out the work. They went up to Maranzano's office in the Helmsley building, flashed their fake badges, and told his guards they needed to search the place. By the time the guards realized something was wrong, it was too late. Maranzano was on the floor, riddled with bullets, his empire crumbling around him. When the news hit, it was like someone had cut the strings holding the city together. For decades, there'd always been a single man at the top, a boss of bosses. But with Maranzano gone, I made damn sure that would never happen again. One man in total control? That's a target too easy to hit. I wanted something different. Something bulletproof. So we built the commission. Not just Italians, well, mostly Italians, but with room for alliances. The 5 families of New York, plus representation from Chicago, Buffalo, and other key cities. Each boss had a seat, each had a say. Disputes would be settled like businessmen, not street punks. No more one man above all. Instead, a table where everyone knew the rules, and everyone understood that breaking them meant the whole commission came down on you. Meyer called it corporatizing the mob, and he wasn't wrong. We made it into an institution. No more petty wars that bled us dry. No more killing for pride alone. We moved like a machine, every cog turning for profit. Gambling, rackets, construction, unions, we touched it all. And the money? It poured in like rain in spring. But there's a funny thing about building something that big. The bigger it gets, the more people want a piece. The more people you have to keep happy, or at least keep in line. I'd gotten rid of Maranzano because I didn't want a knife in my back. Now I had to make sure nobody at the table sharpened one for me. Still, in those first months after Maranzano's death, it felt like the city was finally mine. No more answering to old men stuck in the past. No more pretending bloodline was more important than brains. We were businessmen now, dangerous, yes, but smart. And in that moment, I believed I'd built something that could last forever. Of course, forever's a long time in this business. The thing about peace in our world is that it never lasts. You can put all the bosses in the same room, shake hands, smile for the cameras, hell, you can even mean it in the moment, but sooner or later, somebody gets greedy. And greed doesn't respect agreements. It doesn't care about commissions, rules, or gentlemen's codes. It just takes. The cracks started small. Out west in Chicago, Al Capone had been cooling his heels in prison for tax evasion. That left Frank Nitti running things, and while Nitti was sharp, he didn't have Capone's muscle or charisma to keep the city in check. Smaller outfits started testing boundaries in the liquor game, in gambling, even in unions we thought we had locked down. Then there was the situation down in Philadelphia. A couple of hot-headed underbosses decided they didn't like how profits were being split. They started skimming from joint operations, figuring no one would notice. They forgot that in my world, nothing stays hidden forever. The commission wasn't just a council, it was an intelligence network. We had eyes and ears in every corner of every racket, from Miami to Buffalo. I remember sitting in a smoke-filled room in the Waldorf Towers with Meyer and Vito. Meyer's always calm, but that night his eyes had a glint, the kind that means the math ain't adding up and someone's about to pay for it. Lucky, he said, if we let these little cracks stay open, the whole wall comes down. He was right. This wasn't just about Philadelphia. It was about the message we'd send the rest of the country. So we made the call, a closed commission meeting, no excuses. Every boss had to show or send someone they trusted with their life. We met in a nondescript building in New Jersey, away from prying eyes. No limousines, no flashy suits. Just quiet arrivals, one by one, like ghosts slipping into a graveyard. When the room was full, I laid it out plain. This commission works because we all trust the system more than we trust each other. The second you break that trust, it's over. We go back to street wars, to burying our own men for nickels and dimes. I'm not going back to that. None of you should either. I let the silence hang. You learn a lot about a man by how he handles silence. Some looked me in the eye. Some looked at the floor. A couple shifted in their chairs like they were sitting on hot coals. The Philly cruise boss tried to smooth it over, said it was a misunderstanding, bad bookkeeping. I kept my voice steady, even friendly. Then you won't mind if we fix it permanently. He knew what that meant. By the end of the week, the underbosses causing trouble were gone, not in the papers, not in any official report. Just gone. Quietly. Cleanly. That's how we kept the peace without turning it into a circus. But while we were patching cracks on the East Coast, a storm was building in the Midwest. Kansas City. Small compared to New York or Chicago, but it was a key artery for moving liquor and, later, narcotics across the country. And it was run by a man who didn't think the commission's rules applied to him. His name was John Lazia, flashy, loud, the kind of guy who liked to be seen in the best restaurants, throwing cash like confetti. He'd been a political fixer, a guy who could get judges elected in cases dropped with a phone call. But power makes men stupid, and Lazia started making deals with outfits we didn't sanction, outlaws, desperados who played by no rules at all. It was bad for business and worse for our credibility. I sent word through back channels, gave him a chance to straighten up. He ignored it. That's when I knew it was time to remind everyone coast to coast that the commission wasn't just a club. It was the law. And breaking it had consequences. We greenlit the move, but it wasn't easy. Lazia had the cops in his pocket and the politicians wrapped around his finger. Still, when a man makes enough enemies, doors start to open. One summer night in 1934, as Lazia stepped out of his car in front of his apartment building, two men with shotguns stepped out of the shadows. 12 blasts later, the king of Kansas City was bleeding out on the sidewalk, his fancy suit soaking red. The papers called it gangland vengeance. I called it maintenance. You don't let weeds grow in the garden if you want the flowers to last. The hits in Philadelphia and Kansas City did what they were supposed to for a while. The smaller outfits fell back in line. The bosses who'd been testing limits kept their heads down. But if I'd learned anything by then, it was this: every calm sea hides another storm. And this time, the storm was building somewhere I hadn't expected, inside my own city. It started with whispers about a young hood named Dutch Schultz. Dutch was a Harlem racketeer who'd made a fortune in bootlegging in the numbers game. He wasn't commission material, too wild, too reckless, but he had ambition. And ambition is dangerous when it's mixed with paranoia. Dutch had decided the district attorney, Thomas Dewey, was coming after him. He wasn't wrong. Dewey had already made a name for himself by prosecuting racketeers, and Dutch was high on his list. But instead of taking his lumps or finding another way to fight back, Dutch wanted to put a bullet in Dewey's head. That was suicide, not just for him, but for all of us. Killing a high-profile prosecutor like Dewey would bring heat down on every outfit in the country. The commission couldn't allow it. We called Dutch in, tried to talk him down. I even told him straight, "You shoot Dewey, you sign your own death warrant." He smiled that crooked grin and told me, "Nobody tells Dutch Schultz what to do." That's when I knew he'd just written his last chapter. It didn't take long. In October 1935, Schultz was sitting in a Newark chop house, talking big about his next moves, when the doors opened and two gunmen stepped in. They didn't say a word. Just opened fire. Dutch and a couple of his boys went down in a storm of lead. When the smoke cleared, Dewey was still alive, the commission's rule was intact, and every gangster in America understood the message: the system comes before the man. Always. Looking back, those years were a balancing act, building something stable while constantly putting out fires. One wrong move and the whole thing could have collapsed. But we kept the ship afloat, and for a while, it felt like we'd carved out something close to permanent peace. But like I said, in our world, peace never lasts. The trouble with men like Dewey is that they don't scare easy. You can spook a politician with a newspaper headline. You can buy off a cop with an envelope of cash. But a man like Dewey? He's not in it for the money. He's in it for the glory, the headlines, the speeches, the handshakes from high society. And when a man's chasing his own name, you can't bribe him, you can't reason with him. You can only hope he gets distracted. Dewey wasn't getting distracted. After Schultz went down, Dewey doubled his efforts. He saw the commission not as a shadowy council trying to keep the peace, but as the crown jewel he needed for his collection. And the biggest jewel of all was me. I was careful. Always had been. Never left fingerprints, never signed my name to anything dirty. My money was clean by the time it hit the banks. My fronts were legitimate: nightclubs, real estate, even a piece of the garment district. I lived like a businessman because that's what I was. But to Dewey, I was the king of organized crime. The man who had to be toppled if the world was going to believe in law and order. He started hitting us where it hurt. Raids on the docks. Surprise inspections on the garment shops we controlled. Union bosses getting hauled in for questioning. Guys who'd been solid for years suddenly sweating under bright lights. And here's the thing: even if they didn't talk, the pressure slowed the wheels. Every delay cost us money. Every lost shipment meant somebody else got richer. Meyer and I sat down one night in the back of the Havana Club. He was running numbers in his head, moving chips around the mental board like a chess player. "Lucky," he said, "this guy isn't going away. We've got to start thinking 2 moves ahead. Not just protecting the business, but protecting ourselves." He was right. And in my line of work, protecting yourself meant building a wall of people between you and the dirt. So I started reshuffling the deck. No more direct phone calls to anyone doing hands-on work. Everything went through layers so thick that even if Dewey flipped one, he'd still be 10 steps away from me. But Dewey wasn't playing checkers either. He was working angles I didn't expect. One morning, word comes down that he's been leaning on the girls, the madams, the streetwalkers, the women who worked in the houses we controlled. Now, prostitution wasn't my main racket, but I knew its value. It kept cash flowing and, more importantly, it kept certain powerful men in our debt, men who wouldn't want their names in the papers. Dewey figured if he couldn't get me on bootlegging, gambling, or unions, he'd get me on vice. And the way he went about it, it was smart. He offered the girls a deal: testify against me and they walk free. No records, no fines, no time. Some of them stayed loyal. But some saw a way out. One of them was a girl named Cokie Flo. She'd been around the block more times than she'd care to admit, and she had a memory like a steel trap. Dewey got her talking, and once she started, she didn't stop. She painted a picture of me as the puppet master of every brothel in the city. Most of it was lies or half-truths twisted into something ugly. But the papers ate it up. Now, I've been called a lot of things in my life: bootlegger, racketeer, gambler, even murderer. But pimp? That one stung. Not because I cared what the papers said, but because it was sloppy. And I hate sloppy. Still, I didn't panic. Panic is how men end up in a cell or a coffin. I called my lawyers, the best money could buy, and we started planning a defense. The key was to keep the commission running while I handled this storm. That meant putting more power in Meyer's hands, letting him steer the ship while I fought the fire in court. The trial was a spectacle. Reporters packed the benches. Society ladies whispered behind their gloves. Every day, Dewey strutted in like he was already measuring myself for curtains. And every day, I sat there calm in my tailored suit, like I was attending a board meeting. If he was gonna paint me as the face of crime, I'd at least look like a gentleman doing it. But juries are funny things. You can stack the odds, pick the right people, work the angles, and still, all it takes is one loud voice in that room to swing the decision. Dewey didn't just bring evidence. He brought theater. The girls told their stories. The prosecutors played to outrage. And little by little, I could feel the tide turning. The day the verdict came down, the air in the courtroom felt heavy. I kept my face still, no point giving the papers a photograph of me looking rattled. When the foreman said guilty, there was a gasp from the gallery, like the city itself couldn't believe it. 20 to 50 years. That was the sentence. 20 to 50. That's not a number you shrug off. That's a lifetime. And in my business, a lifetime behind bars usually turns into a short time before someone makes sure you never walk out. But here's the thing about me: I've always believed there's a way out. You just have to find it. The first night in Dannemora was the coldest I'd ever felt. Not just the air, though that was sharp enough to cut your lungs, but the kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you know you ain't walking out the door anytime soon. They call it Little Siberia for a reason. The walls were thick, the windows small, and the guards, well, they enjoyed reminding a man like me that he wasn't untouchable anymore. I wasn't naive. I knew plenty of guys who thought they could run their empire from behind bars. They'd send notes through visiting wives, whisper orders in the yard, slip messages through corrupt guards. Most of them ended up with their orders twisted, their crews turning on each other, and their power slipping away like water through open fingers. I wasn't about to make that mistake. The commission still needed me. And I still needed them. So the first thing I did was make sure Meyer Lansky knew exactly how the game had to be played. He was the one man I trusted to keep the gears turning without stripping the engine. We set up a system, coded messages that could pass right under the noses of the guards. Every chess move on the streets was relayed in ways that would look like nothing more than innocent letters about family or business. But even with Meyer steering, there's only so much a man can control from a cell. That's when I started thinking about the long game. And the long game meant getting out, not in 20 years, not in 10, but soon. Opportunity has a funny way of showing up in unexpected suits. For me, it came dressed in navy blue. It was 1942, and the war in the Pacific was heating up. Everyone was scared of German submarines lurking off the east coast, torpedoing merchant ships, cutting off supply lines. The U.S. Navy was scrambling to protect the docks, the shipping lanes, the whole lifeline of the war effort. But the waterfront? Well, the waterfront belonged to us. See, the Navy could patrol the waters all day long, but they didn't know the piers, the warehouses, the back alleys. We did. We knew every union man, every foreman, every night watchman who might be in a position to help or to hurt the war effort. And we knew how to make sure the right kind of help got through. The connection came through a man named Joseph Sox Lanza, a fisherman turned union boss who ran the Fulton Fish Market. He was already helping the Navy keep an eye out for sabotage. Somebody in the government finally put two and two together and realized if they wanted real control of the docks, they'd need someone with deeper connections. Someone who could reach the men who actually made things happen. And that someone was me. It started as whispers, a lawyer visiting me, asking casual questions about whether I'd be willing to help in exchange for certain considerations. I played it cool. Never act desperate in a negotiation, even when your bed is made of iron and your view is a wall. I told them I was patriotic, and in my way, I was. This was my country, my city, my docks. And if the Navy wanted them safe, I could make that happen. But I wasn't giving anything for free. The deal had to be clean, official. No backroom handshake. I wanted a promise in writing, my sentence reduced, maybe even commuted, in exchange for my cooperation. That was the carrot I dangled, and I made sure they knew I wasn't the kind of man you could play cheap with. 4 months, the talks went back and forth. In the meantime, I fed them just enough to keep them interested, names of suspicious movements on the docks, word of certain troublemakers with foreign ties. Nothing that burned my own people, of course. This was business, not betrayal. Then in '43, the deal started to take real shape. The Navy needed full control of the waterfront for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. Sicily, of all places. My family's home soil. I knew it like the back of my hand, and more importantly, I knew the people. Old connections, old loyalties. Men who'd grown up under the same sun as me, who'd do a favor if I called it in. The Navy wanted a smooth landing, free from local interference. I could promise that. That was my ticket. If I could give them Sicily, I'd be giving them a victory. And victories in wartime have a way of making people generous. Inside my cell, I lay awake at night not thinking about the cold anymore, but about the sound of waves hitting a Sicilian shore. About the taste of freedom. About the headline that would flip the story from convicted mob boss to wartime asset. The war had given me something Dewey never counted on: leverage. And in my business, leverage is everything. The funny thing about war is it makes strange bedfellows. 1 minute the government's calling you a menace to society, the next, they're treating you like a trusted advisor. That's the position I found myself in, sitting in a Dannemora cell while Navy officers in pressed uniforms came to talk to me like I was holding the key to their whole operation. They didn't know Sicily the way I did. To them, it was just a spot on a map, an island to be taken from the Axis so supplies could move through the Mediterranean. To me, it was more than that. It was the old country. My roots. And roots run deep. I still had cousins there, childhood friends, men whose fathers had worked alongside mine back before I ever set foot in America. If the Navy wanted a smooth landing, they'd need those people on their side, or at least out of the way. Now, you don't run something like that from a prison phone. Everything was coded. Messages went out through my lawyers, my visitors, even through carefully phrased letters. A mention of the old vineyard might mean one village. A story about Uncle's bad harvest might mean a shipment was delayed. The feds didn't catch on, but my people knew exactly what I was saying. Meanwhile, on the docks back in New York, Meyer Lansky kept things tight. The unions cooperated with Navy security checks, suspicious characters were quietly kept away from the piers, and any whispers of sabotage were handled before they became problems. The Navy thought they were running the show. Really, they were dancing to music we'd been playing for decades. By mid-1943, Operation Husky was in full swing. The Allies needed Sicily as a stepping stone into Italy, and they wanted it quick and clean. I pulled every string I had. Messages went to men in Palermo, Catania, and the smaller coastal towns. The instructions were simple: keep the roads clear, make sure the locals don't interfere, and if any German sympathizers get in the way, handle it quietly. When the invasion came in July, it went smoother than anyone expected. The U.S. troops landed with barely a shot fired in some areas. Trucks moved along roads without roadblocks. In towns where the Mafia held sway, the soldiers were met not with gunfire but with bread, wine, and directions to German positions. The press never knew the full reason why things went so easily in certain sectors, but the Navy did. And so did I. The reports trickled back: minimal civilian resistance, Axis positions abandoned ahead of schedule, docks secured within days. The brass was pleased. They might not have said it outright, but they knew the whispers were true. A certain man in Dannemora had made their job a whole lot easier. Still, I didn't rush them. Patience is a weapon if you know how to use it. Let them stew in the idea that they owed me. Let the success of Sicily grow in their minds until it became a story they'd repeat in every meeting. Remember how smooth it went, thanks to Luciano. Stories have a way of turning into debts. And debts eventually have to be paid. Back in my cell, I could almost taste the air outside. The guards still looked at me like I was a caged animal, but they didn't know the truth: the cage was already half open. All I had to do was wait for the right man to swing the door. And when he did, I wasn't just gonna walk out, I was gonna walk out with my name in the papers. Not as a gangster. Not as a convict. But as a man who'd helped win a piece of the war. A man the country owed. They say you can't buy redemption. But in my line of work, you can negotiate it. It started small. A letter here. A handshake there. Whispers in hallways where my name was spoken a little softer, with a little less venom. The Navy men who once looked at me like a problem now saw me as an asset, a man who'd delivered. And in Washington, favors were being tallied. See, politics is a lot like the rackets: it's about leverage, perception, and knowing when to cash in your chips. The Sicily job had gone smooth, too smooth for it to be luck. Word had gotten around in the right circles. Some people swore it was just coincidence. Others knew better. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the story. And the story was that Charles Lucky Luciano had made himself useful to Uncle Sam. That story was a seed, and once it was planted, it grew. District attorneys started getting calls from people they normally wouldn't ignore: Navy officials, state politicians, even a couple of federal boys, all dropping hints that maybe, just maybe, it was time to reconsider my situation. Meanwhile, I kept my hands clean. No demands. No ultimatums. I just let the air get thick with the idea that I'd earned something. Men in power hate being told what to do, but they like thinking it's their idea to do it. The press caught wind of it, too. Quiet little pieces in the back pages, half rumors about the Mafia aiding the war effort. Some of it was nonsense. Some of it wasn't. Didn't matter. Public curiosity works the same way as fear: once it starts spreading, you can't put it back in the bottle. By late 45, the war was over and the country was celebrating. For me, it was the perfect time to move. The headlines were full of victory, and people were in the mood to forgive, at least a little. My lawyers started planting the idea in courtrooms and offices: why keep a man locked up when he's proven he can serve his country? Of course, not everyone bought it. Thomas Dewey, the same guy who'd put me away, wasn't exactly itching to let me go. But Dewey was a smart man, and smart men know when they're fighting the tide. He could release me and look like a reasonable statesman, or he could keep me in and risk looking petty after a war I'd supposedly helped win. It took months of backroom talks, subtle pressure, and just enough public chatter to make it palatable. Eventually, Dewey played it the way I knew he would. He announced that, in light of my wartime assistance, I'd be granted clemency. Not a pardon, just a ticket out, with conditions. When the news broke, I didn't smile. Not in public, anyway. Inside, I was grinning like a kid who'd just conned the candy store. From a life sentence in Dannemora to walking free in less than a decade, that wasn't luck. That was strategy. The day they opened that cell, I didn't rush. I stepped out slow, let the moment hang in the air. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs popped, and for a second I was back in the spotlight, not as a convict, but as a man who'd beaten the system by playing it better than anyone else. Of course, I knew the deal came with strings. Dewey had made it clear I was never coming back to America to live. My freedom came with exile. But that didn't bother me. I had places to go, money to spend, and more life to live than anyone expected. Prison bars are one kind of cage. Borders are another. But me? I'd learned a long time ago, every cage has a key. You just gotta know where to look. The air in Italy smelled different. Sea salt, diesel, espresso, a cocktail that told me I was far from the streets I'd once ruled. Naples wasn't New York, and I wasn't 25 anymore. But exile? Exile is just another word for relocation when you've got money and connections. They shipped me here like a package marked fragile, with a quiet warning to stay gone. The American papers painted it like I was being dumped on foreign soil, left to fade away. That was cute. They didn't understand I'd built an empire before, and I could build one again. The first weeks were observation. I kept my head down, walked the narrow streets, watched the people. Italy was a country licking its wounds after the war. Black markets thrived, poverty was everywhere, and the same old truth held: where there's desperation, there's opportunity. I met old friends from the Sicilian days, men who'd heard about my service to the Americans and wanted a piece of that legend. The respect was there, but so was the curiosity: what's a man like Luciano going to do with his second life? I gave them no answers, just a smile and a reminder: in this world, patience is profit. It didn't take long before whispers started. Small operations first: cigarettes, liquor, a little gambling. I wasn't trying to recreate New York here. The landscape was different, the rules more fluid. But power works the same way anywhere: it flows toward the man who can connect the right people and make the right deals. The Americans still kept an eye on me. Agents, local cops, informants, they thought exile meant containment. They didn't realize distance doesn't kill influence. A phone call here, a coded letter there, and business across the ocean could still hum along nicely. But the nights were different. In New York, the city was a living thing: noisy, urgent, full of schemes and dangers. Naples at night was slower, softer, but under that calm was something familiar, a sense that anything could happen if you had the nerve to make it. I'd sit in my apartment, sipping espresso on the balcony, thinking about the streets I'd traded for these cobblestones. Was I free? Yes. Was I still in the game? Absolutely. But it wasn't the same. No matter how many moves I made here, New York was the stage I was built for, and I knew I'd never walk it again. That's the thing about being a king: take away the kingdom, and the crown feels a little heavier. Still, I wore it. Because men like me don't retire. We adapt, we rebuild, and we wait. And if the day ever came when I could set foot on American soil again, well, let's just say I'd have a few unfinished conversations. They said I died of a heart attack. That's what the papers wrote, neat and tidy, like my story could be wrapped up in a single sentence. But life, real life, never ends that clean. There are always shadows, whispers, and the kind of questions no one really wants answered. It was January 1962, and Naples was colder than usual. I'd been feeling it in my chest for weeks, tight, heavy, like the weight of all the years was finally catching up.
But you don't tell anyone that. You keep moving.
You keep making calls, meeting people, shaking hands.
A boss doesn't show weakness, not even when the game is almost over.
That afternoon I was at the airport, waiting for someone. An old associate, one of those ghosts from the past who still thought I could make things happen.
Maybe I could.
We were talking, laughing even, when it hit me, sharp and sudden.
My knees buckled, and the floor came up fast. They tell me I went quick. I like to think that's true.
No long hospital stays, no pity in people's eyes. Just lights, voices fading, and then nothing.
If you gotta go, that's the way.
But here's the thing, they never stopped talking. Some said I was poisoned, that the Americans or the Sicilians had finally decided the ledger needed balancing. Others swore it was just time catching up.
And maybe it doesn't matter. Dead is dead.
They buried me back in Naples, far from the streets that made me. No grand funeral like I might have had in New York, but enough flowers to remind people who I'd been. People came, old friends, new enemies, curious faces who just wanted to see the man in the ground. I think about that sometimes, how a man spends his life building power, carving out a name, and in the end it all fits into a wooden box. The empire, the money, the fear, the respect, gone in a breath.
What stays is the story. The legend. The parts they can't quite prove but love to repeat anyway.
And if you're hearing this now, maybe you're wondering if I regret it.
The answer's simple, no. I played the game the only way I knew how. I took my chances. I made my moves. And I walked through this life on my own terms. That's more than most can say. Now the streets are quiet, the deals are someone else's to make, and I'm just another name in the history books. But somewhere, in some backroom, in the low light of a smoky bar, someone's still telling my story. And in that way, I never really left. Funny thing about death, once you're gone, you lose control of the story. You can't tell them what's true and what's just smoke. People fill in the blanks with whatever makes the best tale. And with me? Well, there was a lot of blank space to fill. After I was in the ground, the legends grew faster than the weeds over my grave. Some said I was the man who made the modern mob, that every crew, every racket, every handshake deal across America still carried my fingerprints. Others painted me as the devil in a silk suit, the one who brought vice to the dinner table and called it business. The truth? Somewhere in between. I wasn't no saint, and I wasn't no cartoon villain either. I was a man who understood the value of connections, who knew that the right word at the right time could move more weight than a truckload of muscle. But history, especially the kind told in whispers, has a way of bending. They left out the nights I couldn't sleep, the faces I couldn't forget. They left out the quiet moments when I wondered if I'd crossed some invisible line a long time ago, and whether I'd ever been able to come back from it. The movies got it all wrong, too. In their versions, everything's bigger, louder, bloodier. The shootouts last longer, the women fall faster, the betrayals are sharper. They forget the boring parts, the endless meetings, the long hours waiting for the right phone call. They forget that power isn't taken in a blaze of glory, it's earned, inch by inch, deal by deal, until one day you look around and realize you own the room. Sometimes I imagine watching it all from somewhere above, or maybe below, seeing my name flash in headlines, hearing the way they speak it, Lucky Luciano. Like it was made for the stage. But I was born Salvatore Lucania. That name belonged to a kid from Lercurafritti who came to New York with nothing in his pockets but hope. The rest? That was something I built piece by piece, until the kid disappeared and the kingpin was all that was left. And maybe that's the point. Legends aren't meant to be accurate, they're meant to last. Truth fades, facts get buried, but a good story?
That sticks. Maybe that's why, all these years later, you're still here, listening to me talk in the dark. Maybe you don't care what's real and what ain't. Maybe you just want to feel like you're close to the fire, if only for a little while. If that's the case, well, kid, pull up a chair. The night's still young.